The water stopped first, not slowly, not with a warning. 1 minute, I was standing in my kitchen on a bright Tuesday afternoon, filling a glass from the faucet. The next minute, nothing came out. I turned the handle again, nothing. I checked the bathroom, nothing. Then my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. Your property is currently under review for compliance. I stared at the screen because 3 days earlier, the HOA president, Karen Whitmore, had offered to buy my house. And I had told her no. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I had lived in Maple Ridge Estates for almost 9 years. It was a quiet neighborhood outside the city, lined with mature oak trees, wide sidewalks, mature oak trees, and modest 2-story homes. My house sat at the end of Willow Creek Lane. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable home with a small backyard, a wooden deck, and a garage where I spent most weekends working on old furniture. The problem started when the HOA decided they wanted my property. Karen first approached me during a neighborhood meeting. She smiled, handed me a folder, and said, "Ryan, the association is interested in purchasing your property. You'd be surprised how much easier things would be if you simply moved." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The OA wanted to expand a community recreation area behind my house. My property was the last piece they needed. They offered me a number well below what my house was worth. I refused. Karen's smile disappeared. "Think carefully," she told me. "I already have. That should have been the end of it." It wasn't. 2 days later, I received my first violation notice. My trash bins were supposedly visible from the street. I moved them. Then another notice arrived. My backyard fence allegedly violated an obscure architectural rule. I checked the HOA documents. It didn't. Then they complained about my driveway, then my mailbox, then the wooden planter boxes beside my porch. Every time I fixed something, another violation appeared. It felt less like enforcement and more like pressure. Then on Friday afternoon, Karen came to my door with 2 HOA board members. I opened the door and immediately noticed a brown folder in her hands. She wasn't there to discuss another violation. She had come with another offer. Karen stood on my front porch, flanked by the 2 board members, and calmly said, "Ryan, we're prepared to increase the purchase price." I looked at the folder, then at the 3 people standing in front of me. I already knew what they wanted. "My answer hasn't changed," I said. "I'm not selling." Karen's polite smile slowly disappeared. She glanced at the 2 board members before looking back at me. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. I didn't argue. I simply shook my head and closed the door. At the time, I thought that was the end of the conversation. I had no idea that the next thing they would take from me wouldn't be an offer. It would be my electricity. The next Monday morning, my electricity went out. At first, I assumed it was a normal outage, but my neighbors still had power. I called the utility company. They told me there was no outage reported in my area. Then they discovered something strange. A service request had been submitted against my property. The request claimed that electrical work at my house violated neighborhood regulations. I had never submitted it. The utility company restored my service after verifying everything was safe. That afternoon, another HOA email arrived. Unauthorized electrical modifications have been reported. There have been no modifications. Someone was creating problems that didn't exist, and they were using the HOA's authority to make those problems look official. The next morning, my gas service was suddenly interrupted. This time, I panicked. I called the gas company immediately. A technician arrived that afternoon. He inspected the meter, the line, and the appliances. Everything was perfectly safe. Then he showed me the reason for the shutoff. Someone had reported a suspected gas leak at my property. There was no leak. The technician restored my service and left. I stood in my driveway watching his truck disappear. That's when I noticed something across the street. Karen was standing beside her SUV watching me. She didn't wave. She just turned around and walked away. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I started documenting everything. Every email, every violation, every phone call, every photograph. I created a folder on my computer called Maple Ridge. That's when I noticed something. Almost every complaint against my house had been filed within hours of an HOA communication. It wasn't random. Someone was coordinating this. Then came the water. That Tuesday afternoon, the faucet went completely dry. I called the water department. They said there was no city maintenance scheduled. But there was a note attached to my account. Service interruption requested by property association. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands went cold. I asked a woman on the phone who had made the request. She hesitated. The request came through a property management representative, she said. Is there a name? Another pause. Karen Whitmore. I looked through my kitchen window. Karen's house was directly across the street. Her curtains were open, and she was standing behind them, watching my house. I grabbed my phone and took a picture. The second she noticed me, she stepped away from the window. That's when I knew this wasn't about HOA rules anymore. Someone was trying to make my home impossible to live in, and they were getting bolder every day. I called my friend Marcus Reed, an attorney who worked in property law. I sent him every violation, every email, and every utility record. He called me back less than 10 minutes later. Don't fix anything else yet, he said. Why? There was a pause. Because I think they're leaving you a trail. What kind of trail? The kind that could prove exactly why they want your house. I looked at the stack of HOA notices sitting on my counter. For the first time, I stopped asking myself, how do I get them to leave me alone? And started asking, what are they hiding? Marcus told me to request the HOA's official records. Board meeting minutes, emails, property discussions, violation records, everything. I sent the request that afternoon. Karen responded within 24 hours, your request is being reviewed. But Marcus wasn't waiting. He helped me contact the utility companies directly and obtain records showing the complaints made against my property. The pattern became obvious. Electricity, gas, water, different complaints, different days, but the same property. And then we found a name attached to several of the reports. Karen Whitmore. I took the records to the next HOA board meeting. The room was packed. Karen sat at the front table. She looked completely confident until I placed the documents in front of her. I'd like to ask why the HOA reported a gas leak that didn't exist. Nobody spoke. Why was my electricity flagged for modifications that weren't made? Silence. And why did the water department receive a restriction request from this association? Karen finally stood. These accusations are completely irresponsible. Marcus stepped forward. They're not accusations. He placed copies of the utility records on the table. They're documented requests. The room went quiet. Then one of the board members picked up a page. His face changed. He looked at Karen. Did you submit these? Karen didn't answer. Another board member started flipping through the documents. Then someone in the back of the room spoke. I have copies of the purchase proposal. Karen turned toward him. It was Daniel Brooks, a former HOA board member who had resigned 6 months earlier. Daniel walked to the front. You told us Ryan would eventually sell, he said. Karen's expression hardened. You said the association needed his property for the expansion project. People started whispering. Daniel continued. And you told the board that if he refused, we'd make ownership difficult enough that he'd change his mind. The room exploded with questions. Karen tried to interrupt, but it was already over. Suddenly, everyone understood. The violations weren't about trash cans. They weren't about fences. They weren't about landscaping. They were pressure designed to make me uncomfortable enough to sell. The HOA board suspended Karen pending investigation. The utility complaints were reported as unauthorized. My water, gas, and electricity remained connected, and the property expansion project was put on hold. But the strangest part came 2 weeks later. The HOA sent me one final letter. It wasn't another violation. It wasn't another purchase offer. It was an apology. They admitted that several enforcement actions against my property had not followed proper procedure. Karen eventually resigned, and the HOA abandoned its plan to acquire my house. Today, I'm still standing in the same kitchen where the water suddenly stopped. The same house, the same driveway, the same backyard. But now there's one thing hanging beside my front door. A small security camera. Not because I'm afraid of the HOA anymore. Because I've learned something. When someone wants your property badly enough, they don't always start by taking it. Sometimes they start by making you believe you can't afford to keep it. And if I hadn't kept every email, every notice, and every utility record, they might have succeeded. So whenever someone tells you it's just an HOA rule, make sure you know exactly what rule they're talking about. Because sometimes the real story isn't about the rule. It's about what they want you to give up. And standing in my kitchen that afternoon, staring at that dry faucet, I realized something else. The water hadn't been the beginning. It had been the warning. Because 3 days earlier, Karen had offered to buy my house. And I had told her no. And that's exactly where this story began.
Subscribe the channel and press the bell icon for new updates.